Hello everyone, welcome back to my booktube. I'm a romance reader and I love all things to do with books, so if you like this sort of content, don't forget to subscribe and let's get into the video. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing a book yearly wrap-up, seeing as it's the end of December now, it's the end of the year, so I want to tell you about the books that I've read this year, what I thought and how many books I actually read. According to my reading journal that I've been tracking it on, I have read 24 books this year, which is not as many as I did last year. However, I did have a big 3-month slump between the months of May and August, so I didn't read any books in between them months, so that is why. So I've only read 24 books, but 24 books is still 24 books. So the first book I read was Baby It's Cold Outside by Emily Bell. Now this one, I only gave it 3.5 stars because it was just a little bit slow to build up and there was nothing really that was engaging me, and it took me a while to carry on reading it. I started this book at the end of December last year, the 28th of December, and I actually finished it on the 24th of January. So it took me nearly a month to read it because, again, it wasn't something that I really wanted to pick up and I wasn't really enjoying it that much, and it just wasn't really grabbing my interest to keep reading it. But I just pushed through just to finish it as a book off my TBR for the beginning of the year. So like I said, it was very slow to build up. There wasn't really nothing that was like grabbing my attention to pull me in. This story, I believe, is about a woman that meets somebody when she's on holiday. So she shows her past. So she met somebody on holiday, they started getting together, they kept emailing each other, and then 10 years passed and it sort of dwindled away, and then all of a sudden they met up again and they were like, oh my god, we should meet again, we should meet on Christmas Eve. And then as she gets to Christmas Eve, she doesn't end up meeting him, it's someone else, because she's like, oh, actually this isn't the person for me because he's not even turned up. I'm sure that's how it is. And then the person that she talks to as a friend, and she's always been friends with him, it's actually him that she falls in love with, because it was him all along and she didn't expect it. So, and because she didn't expect it, I think that was what she liked the most about it, because it was somebody that was always there, somebody always had an interest in her, but she was like, nah, this isn't, you know, I don't really have an interest, we're just friends, this is nothing else. And then obviously at Christmas Eve he comes to her rescue and was like, I knew we weren't going to meet you, but here I am instead. And I think he's the one that brings her the flowers and everything. I'm sure it's him that makes out it's the other person, it's not, and it's actually him, and he's like brought her flowers and everything, and obviously they go off and get together. But again, it was nothing major, nothing like really grabbing my attention to keep reading it. I think that's why it took me so long to read it in the end, because there was nothing like, oh my god, this is amazing. But it wasn't a bad story, it wasn't the worst story I've read. So the next book I read was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. Now, as you know, I absolutely love her books. I actually pre-ordered this book as of June the year before when it came out, but I just didn't get around to reading it, and I thought, you know what, let's pick it up and see what it's about. Now, this one for me only got 3.5 stars because I think it was more the characters. Like, I love the way that Ali Hazelwood writes and I love her books in general, but I think these characters in particular was really getting on my nerves, and I think that is why I didn't necessarily love it as much as some of the other ones I've read. So this one again is about a woman in STEM. If you don't know, then Ali Hazelwood does write a lot of stories about women in STEM. Obviously there's some stories where she's wrote, you know, completely different, but most of them are to do with women in STEM, and this is one of them. And for me personally, I feel like this one was a little bit similar, or trying to remake, of Love Hypothesis. Like, I really enjoyed Love Hypothesis, you know, I gave that I think about a 4.5 star when I did read it, or 4 star. But this one I felt like it was like a copy of that one, but it wasn't as good, if you know what I mean, because I feel like it was just, I was rereading Love Hypothesis but just switched a little bit, and it was a bit like, am I really enjoying this as much as I should be? No, not really, because I just feel like I've already read this story. And that the woman Elsie was very much a people pleaser in this story, and I think that's what was getting on my nerves, because all the way through the story, right up until the end, she then started to stick up for herself and believe in what she wanted to believe in and not what other people wanted her to do. And I think that's what was getting on my nerves, because people were dragging her down, and she was just like, oh yeah, it's okay, it's fine. Whereas behind closed doors, she knew full well it wasn't what she wanted, and it was like, oh my god, just speak up for yourself, and it's really annoying me. And Jack, at the beginning, he was very much an arsehole, and she didn't like him and vice versa, but towards the end we sort of realised he wasn't as much of an arsehole as he was in the beginning, and why he was, but it was still grating on me. And I think that's what it is. When a book has characters in it that I don't particularly love, or there's something about the characters that I don't really like, I feel like that then spoils the book for me. I think that's why I didn't enjoy it as much, and I feel like if I can't connect to the characters, that is why I can't enjoy books so much. So yeah, this one for me personally, I only go over 3.5 stars because, again, like I said, I was rereading Love Hypothesis. Now, I have read Love Hypothesis and I really enjoyed that book, but for it to be like a copy and paste version of it, I feel like, you know, I wanted it to be a different story and a different thing, but I felt like I was rereading it. So yeah, for me, 3.5 stars. Wasn't bad, but not one of the best books. So the next book I read this year was Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, and for me this story got 5 stars at the time that I read it. Now since then I feel like it's not really a 5-star, and I feel like when I first began to read it I did say, oh, you know, I'm not sure if it's a 5-star yet, and when I read the last of it I was like, oh, I'm not really sure, because I remember at the beginning of this story I wasn't really loving it until I got to around about the middle mark of this book. I was a bit like, oh, it's a bit slow, I don't really know if I'm going to enjoy this, but as I kept reading it I was like, it's not bad. But now I think back at it, I don't think I would have rated it 5-star. I think I would have rated it at least like 4, because I don't feel like this was 5-star material, because I don't think I would have picked it up again personally, and I feel like when I rate a book 5 stars it means I will pick up again to reread, and I feel like that's not it at the minute. So yes, anyway, at the time obviously I gave it 5 stars. I did read it in February. I liked how everything flowed really nicely. I think that having dual point of views as well, which was nice, I like that, but it was done really nicely, so it was like past and present, and it was just flowed really nicely. It didn't like jump from one scene to another. It flowed in the way that it should have done, and that's what I like. If a book is written where it's got past and present in it, it needs to be a nice flow to it, and rather than just going, right, you've done one thing, switch it to another, and you're like, whoa, this does not make sense. But this one, it flowed really nicely, and that's why I quite enjoyed this book. So the next book I read this year was Twisted Love by Anna Huang. I have had this book on my TBR for a very, very long time, and I was really wary about picking it up because I thought so many people love it, and I was like, am I going to like it or not? And to be honest, when I read it, I really enjoyed it, and I did give this book 4.5 stars. I gave it 4 stars, actually. I gave it 4 stars, not 4.5. But I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I would. I really liked the storyline. I liked that it was more of a story rather than just, you know, full-on spice, which is what I like. I like if a story has spice in it, I like a story to go with it, you know, a storyline rather than just every page is just spice by spice all the time. There has to be a story with it, and I feel like this is what it is. It reminded me a little bit of King of Wrath. Now, I didn't particularly love King of Wrath, but the storyline of it was very similar to King of Wrath because of Alex and how he was. He wanted to get revenge and stuff, and yeah, I just think it was very similar to the way that King of Wrath was, but I feel like this one was written a little bit better than King of Wrath. The next book I read was Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. Now, this one for me only got 3 stars. In this story there was a lot of mentions of my hometown and obviously Sherwood Forest, so they had to go on this camping thing and they ended up in Sherwood Forest where they had to work together. So there was a team of them having to go try and get this scholarship. Now, as it was writing about a scholarship, we don't have scholarships in the UK, so I feel like it was a bit of a mixture of the US and the UK. I've never heard of it in the UK anyway, it's just mainly in America, so I think they sort of mixed that up a little bit. But this story was a friends to lovers trope, and something where it was like a enemies to lovers, friends to lovers / frenemies to lovers, because they were friends a very long time ago, and then all of a sudden they had to come back together because she'd entered this thing to get this scholarship, and the other character, the boy, he was a bit like, right, I'm gonna compete against her and I'm the one that's gonna win. However, as they go there, they end up realising they've got to work together to get to a point. They have to be put in teams, so they're like, oh great, like I don't want to be put with her and vice versa. But I liked the character Celine in this book because she was very feisty and knew what she wanted. She was straight to the point, didn't take no shit, and she was like, right, I'm going to do it whether you like it or not. And that's what I like in a character as a woman in a book. I like them when they're a bit more feisty, a bit more like, yeah, I know what I want and I'm going to go and get it. And this is what Celine was given. And because they were friends a very long time ago, something happens and they obviously start to separate as they get older, and then they start to hate each other, and then because obviously they've had to come back to rekindle, well, to go back into this group to work together, they start to realise actually it's not the way that it seemed all them years ago, and they're actually still pining for each other as friends. And they didn't know that because they'd never spoke to each other, they hated each other, and that was why when they ended up coming back together, they realised it wasn't as it seemed. And I like that the character Celine was also plus size, so if a book is wrote about a plus size woman, I usually tend to pick it up because I think, well, I'm plus size and I just like the fact that books are being written about plus size people because that's what the position I'm in, so I like to read about stuff like that. So that's what I liked about this book. However, it wasn't something that was really gripping. It did take me a little bit longer to read, but it wasn't nothing that was like, wow, I was absolutely amazed by. So that's why I only gave it 3 stars. So if I rate it 3 stars, it means it wasn't bad, but it's not great. And it was kind of alright. It was like in the middle sort of thing. But again, just not really something that I would tend to go back to, so that's why I only gave it 3 stars. So now we kind of move on to March/April time. It's slowly getting into the slumpy months. So the next one, I can't really say I read it because I DNF'd this book. So this is Love Struck by Laura Jane Williams, and for me, I got to about the 10th chapter or 5th chapter or whatever it was, and I just thought, I can't really get into this book. It's not a bit to me. And also this book was written in 3rd person. Now, a lot of people are like, why can't you read books in 3rd person? Well, I can't, because I just can't deal with the characters. Like, I'd rather see it from the reader's perspective rather than someone else's perspective, if that makes sense. So that's one of the reasons why I DNF'd it, but also I just feel like I couldn't really get into it. I couldn't like absorb it enough, and that it just felt to me very boring. So that's why I ended up DNF this book. And it was very jumpy from scenes. So with characters and scenes, it was like you read one chapter and it jumped from one end to the other, and I was like, whoa, what on earth is going on? And that is why I struggle with 3rd person books if they are very jumpy like that, because you just can't keep up with it, and it's a bit like, oh, I don't really want to read it. So that is why I ended up DNFing this book. So the next book I read was You're the One That I Want by Giovanni Fletcher. I feel like that's how you say her name. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. So this was an April read. This one, I really enjoyed this one. Ben was very sweet and very kind towards Maddie. There was 3 of them in the friendship, so they started having a friendship right from school. So she'd started in that school of theirs, and they were like, oh, I don't know if to, you know, introduce ourselves, you know, try and bring her into the friendship. And Ben always liked her right from the beginning, but Maddie was like, no, I'm not, you know, didn't really take a fancy to him. It was always the other boy, I can't remember his name now, but she always took a fancy to the other boy, and he always loved her right from the beginning, and he always kept it to himself. He never really told her, he just sort of like carried on. And because there was 3 of them in the friendship, and once she started getting involved with the other boy, it was a bit like, you know, jealousy started to kick in. But he was still trying to be friends with both of them and kept the relationship going, but didn't tell her. But Ben was very sweet and kind in this story, and I feel like he should have said what he needed to say all them years ago instead of letting it happen the way that it did. And I feel like she would have been better off with him all them years ago, but obviously it didn't happen like that. It was an alright book, seeing as I rated it 4.5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It didn't really take me that long to read either, about a week, 2 weeks. They are the books that I read at the beginning of the year, and then from May to August, I then had a big reading slump, and I didn't pick up another book until September. So I kind of missed a good chunk of the year out of when I was reading books, but I did manage to pick it up slightly in the month of September. So in September, I read 4 books. The first book I read in September was Two Wrongs Make a Right. Now, this was a reread because I really enjoyed this book. I thought, you know what, let's get back into reading again and pick up a book that I already know I'm going to like, because I really enjoyed it before, so let's read it again. So this one, I absolutely love this one. I banged on about this book on YouTube a lot now, so I'm not going to bang on about it in this video, but this one I really enjoyed, and I thought, you know what, if I want to get out of a reading slump, let's pick it up to reread to get me out of that slump, and it definitely did. So that is why I reread this one in September. So the next story I read in September was The Night Shift by Annie Crown. This one I gave 5 stars because I really enjoyed it. This one reminded me a lot of the After series, and the way that the bet trope was there, and the way that they met in the library and stuff. It just sounded very much like the After books to me, and the way that Tessa and Hardin was. Now obviously he's a basketball player and she likes her English, so the English side of it was very much like Tessa, but obviously the basketball bit wasn't like Hardin. But the way that the characters were wrote and the way that everything was going off, it just reminded me very much of the After books. I've talked about this on book 2 before, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but yes, I really enjoyed this one, and this was another book that I read in September. Now, in September, I read quite a few books that were very much a favourite for me, and I feel like that's what got me out of that slump. So as I kept reading books in September, I was like, oh my god, this is the best book ever. This is a really good book. So the next one I read was This Spells Love, and again, this was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely loved it. I love this book as well because this is the only book that I own that's got a flop, and I was really hoping that I enjoyed this book so I could keep it because of that reason, and I did. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This was Friends to Lovers, and I feel like the Friends to Lover, I was like, oh, before I was like, oh no, I don't think I really like that sort of trope, but as I've read more books with it in, I'm like, actually, maybe I do. And maybe I do like that trope. So this was a friends to lovers book where she has to rekindle a friendship that she once lost. So because of this spells love, it's sort of like a spiritual witchy sort of vibe to it. So if you like that sort of thing, I would 110% recommend this book because I really enjoyed it myself. And this was about a girl that she met someone in a bar and they were friends together. So the person that she ends up going out with has another friend with him, but he's always liked her but didn't actually say it because she took the chance to go with the other one. And she kind of regretted it, ended up being his ex. And then one day she's like, oh, I wish I never met him. If I never met him, it would have never happened. But obviously, if she had never met the ex-boyfriend, she would have never met the other man. So that's what sort of happens. She does this spiritual, what do you call it, like spell? I suppose it's called a spell, and that's what she ends up doing. And then the next day she wakes up and actually realises that the person that she was friends with, best friends with all her life, is no longer her friend because he has no idea who she is. So she has to then go back to rekindle it to get the flame going again so that they're friends, but then doesn't realise actually I actually quite fancy this man, and vice versa, he's always like me. So yeah, I really enjoyed this side. There was a little bit of spice in it, but again, not a lot. But I love the storyline to it. I really enjoyed this book, and this has got to be, again, one of my favourites that I've read this year. So the next book I read / listened to this year is The Wiener Across the Way. Now this is actually part of a series. The first one is called Cock Down the Block, and this one is obviously the next book in that series. Now you can read them as standalones because they just have brief mentions of the characters in the books, but this is, again, like I say, part of a series. So this one, for me, got 3.5 stars. Now, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't, like, the best book I've ever read in my life. So this one is about a woman that is a pop star and the man is an NFL player. And I like the fact that this woman writes about plus-size women getting with people that, you know, are a bit more fit and a bit more toned and a bit more, you know, supposedly unstereotypically getting with women that are bigger, if that makes sense. So they are related, as in the books, because the men that she speaks about are all brothers. Obviously the women and the men aren't related, I don't mean it like that. I meant like the brothers are all related. So the last book had a brother in it, and then this one is his brother, if that makes sense. So they're all brothers together, and that's what they all relate to. The storyline was very similar to the previous one. So obviously there was an animal involved. She does write about animals, so they always have a pet. So the pet was called Pooh, which is the Wiener dog, so that's why it's called Wiener Across the Way. So obviously it's a spin-off on, you know, the name of the body parts, but obviously it's to do with the animal. So, but they're both famous, so they both got a status behind them, and they want Kelsey, which is the girl, to go out with Declan as a fake date thing, just to get the, you know, tabloids and the papers and everything speaking about that she's moved on from her ex-boyfriend and that she's with somebody else now, you know, she's with somebody new, and they're all happy and la-di-da-di-da. However, because they're fake dating, she's like, oh, I don't know whether to do it or not, because I don't know if he's going to want to, because, you know, I'm a big girl and I don't know if he's going to say yes. And in the end he does say yes, but he says it because he actually really likes her, and he sort of keeps showing up for her all the time, does things for her, you know, takes her feelings into account. And she's a bit like, oh, I don't know if I'm just seeing this or whether it's true, you know, whether it's just a put on just because we're fake dating, it's just, you know, for the media and stuff. But actually it's not, and he really likes her, and I like the fact that he falls first in this story. But I like the fact that he drilled sense into her, and he was telling her, like, you know, your record label aren't doing you any favours, you need a break, you need to breathe, you know, you're overworking yourself. And she's like, no, it's fine, like, I need to keep going, And he's like, but you're going to be burnt out. And in the end, something does happen, and he's like, right, you need to rest now. So he plans a little trip away from him, and they have this rest together. Again, it's very similar to the Cock Down the Block. There was some bits in it that was very cringy and a bit like, oh, okay. But apart from that, it was an alright story, and it wasn't the worst book I've ever read, let's put it that way. And I feel like this one was, I wouldn't really class it as a fluffy romance, I more class it as a sloppy, sort of soppy romance, to be honest. And I think that's why I only gave it 3.5 stars. So the next story I read was Soulmates by Holly Bourne. Now I did actually do a reading vlog on this, so if you want to go and check it out, then I'll leave it in the little eye. But this, I didn't fully enjoy this. I really did not like it. It was very drony. It took a very long time to sort of get into it, and once it got into it, it was a bit like, oh, was that it? Like, it was a bit pointless to know what happened at the end. But it weren't bad because I kept reading it. So it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I'm just going to put down and never going to pick it up again. But it wasn't something that was really grabbing my attention. And this one took a while for me to read in the end. But it was a YA book, and it was more about soulmates getting together and they're not allowed to be together, which was kind of heartbreaking at the end, because it was like, right, they found each other, they got together, they really liked each other, you know, and they felt like that connection was there, but they weren't allowed to be together. And it's really sad actually, but it just took a very long time to get to the point. It was a bit like, oh come on, you know, like this bit, nice little setup to begin with, and then in the middle it was really droning. I was like, oh come on, we know something's going to happen now, like you need to get to the point already. And then once it got to the point, it was a bit like, was there any point in that? Like, was there any point of waiting that long? Like, it didn't need to be this long to get to that point. So yeah, I didn't really thoroughly enjoy this book. I feel like every book I've said this year has been like, oh, I've not really enjoyed this book. But I'm just being honest. If I don't like a book, I'll just say that I don't like a book, because there's no point in me lying. There's no point in me saying, oh, I really enjoyed it when actually I didn't. So yeah, this is another one that I was not thoroughly enjoying it this year. So the next one was The Idea of You. Again, I did not finish this book because I just couldn't get into it. I read about 10 chapters, I believe, and I just thought it was too jumpy for me. And even though this story was about an older woman and a younger man, there's nothing in it that was really grabbing my attention. It was very jumpy from one minute to the next, and then it was like talking about a daughter, then it was talking about something else, and it was like, what on earth is going on? It was very, very all over the place, and I just really couldn't get into it. And I really tried to push it, because apparently people were saying this is really good, and I know there's a film on it. I don't know if the film is any better, and whether I'd be able to get the storyline a bit better from the film, but the book, I couldn't, so I didn't end up reading this, unfortunately. So this was another DNF that I had this year. So the next one is another one that I had read in a reading vlog. So this is Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. Now, this one, it took me a very long time to read, because I wasn't feeling it at the beginning. I was a bit like, oh no. So I put it down, I picked up other books, and then I sort of went back to it. And then once I went back to it, I then started to enjoy it a little bit more, because it was just like, again, it was very similar to Soulmates, where it was like, yeah, nice little setup. I mean, to the point, at the beginning, there was a lot of characters, and I was like, whoa, what on earth is going on? So I had to sort of like sit and think about all these characters being mentioned. Now, the main ones are obviously Noah, Chase, and Ariana, but there was other ones mentioned, and if you weren't keeping up, you didn't know where he was. And it was kind of confusing at the beginning. I was a bit like, whoa, what on earth is going on? I thought, have I picked up the second part of this story and not the first one? However, this is the first book, and I was a bit like, whoa, okay, there's a lot going on at the beginning. But then once I started to understand what was going off, it then got a bit droning. It was a bit like, oh, you know, it needs to pick up a little bit. And then once it got to the end, something changed, and I was a bit like, oh. And I thought in the end she was gonna go with Chase, because Chase was like pulling her in. Chase really got on my nerves in the story, because he was taking advantage of Ariana because of what happened to her. And it was a bit like, what the fuck? Like, oh, now you realise, oh, actually she actually really liked me and she wanted to know me, but you took the piss right from the beginning and was like, oh, I'm just gonna play around, play with her feelings. And then because she stopped chasing him and went with somebody else, he was a bit like, oh, she's not chasing him anymore, oh, why is that, you know, getting mad at. And then all of a sudden, like, he started to show her after her accident how he actually felt, and it was like, no, you didn't really feel like that, so you're just taking the piss. So then when it got to the end, she started to think, oh, maybe it is, you know, maybe he is the person for me, maybe it was me. And the one that she actually got with in the middle of the book, which was Noah, he had to step back and let her decide, which was so nice of him to do that, because it was like, no, I'm not going to take advantage, I want her to pick and realise it's not him. But the more and more it kept going on, the more and more it was killing him, because he could see that she was, you know, kept going with him and be like, oh my god, this is the person. But then in the end she starts to remember and was like, no, he is not for me, he's not the one that I wanted, he's not it. And it was Noah. So I'm so glad that that ended up happening, because I thought if she gets with Chase, this is a waste of the book and wasting my time, but she didn't. So yeah, I only gave it 3 stars because, again, it was all right, but it was very drony, and I feel like, again, it wasn't really necessary with that amount of pages. But I'm glad that she chose Noah over Chase, because Chase was an arsehole all the way through. And I know there is a second part to this book, but I'm like, no, I'm not reading that story, because I just don't care. I don't really care about Chase's side, because he took advantage of her, and, you know, because she kept chasing him all the time, he was like, oh, you know, I really like you, you know. And he knew that, but then as soon as she took the attention of another man and she was like going with him, he was like, oh, why is she not chasing me? Why is she not doing this anymore? And that's what was really annoying me. So yeah, I only gave it 3 stars because of that reason. But again, I don't think I would recommend it personally, depending on what you want. But again, not the worst book I've read, but definitely not my favourite because of Chase. Chase was doing my head in. So this is where I ended up reading my first thriller book. So in October, we are now in, I read my first ever thriller book, and this was Never Lie by Frida McFadden. Oh my god. Why have I never read a Frida McFadden book and a thriller book? Because so many people really enjoy her books, and I was like, oh, you know, don't know if it's going to be scary, I'm not really interested in that sort of thing. And I thought, let's just try it. It's on Prime Reading, let's give it a go, you know, it's not costing me anything. Let's give it a read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I read it in 4 hours flat. I really, really liked this book, and it was something that I was like so surprised, because there was so many twists and turns, so many shocking moments, so many bits where I was like, oh, I need to keep reading this book, and I just kept going, and I read it in 4 hours flat. So yes, this book was a 5-star read for me, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I like her books because most of them get you thinking that it's a certain person and it's actually not, it's someone else. And I just love that. I love the fact that it was so gripping and so engaging in the book. So of course, now I'd obviously read Never Lie, I decided to read another book by her, which was The Locked Door. So this one got, again, 5 stars. I just love it. I love Frida McFadden's writing. I love the fact that she keeps you engaged and gripped, and then as soon as you think it's someone, it will change. But actually, no, it's not. It's not that person that you think it is. But I do give it that. I was suspecting every single person in this book because of how I'd read the last one. I thought, well, if I go in it again and not suspect anyone, then obviously I won't. But I still didn't get who it was, if that makes sense. I still didn't guess it. I mean, you could do if you sat and thought about it properly, but again, I didn't guess who this was, and even though I was suspecting all of them, I was a bit like, oh, maybe it's not them then, or maybe it's not them. And that's what I liked about these stories, because they were gripping and they were engaging, and the fact that it got your mind guessing. Now, the next one, again, was another Frida McFadden, because I just thought I've got to keep reading these books because they're just engaging. So the next one I read was The Boyfriend by her. Now, this one in particular, it kind of disappointed me from the previous books I've read, and I was like, oh. So it wasn't a bad story, but it definitely wasn't my favourite of hers. This one only got 3.5 stars for me because I feel like this book was very much based on jealousy and blackmail, and the characters that were surrounding it, I was a bit like, oh, this is fucking weird. Like, I don't particularly love this one, and I feel like it just wasn't, it was gripping, but it wasn't something that I really thoroughly enjoyed like the previous books, and that's why I only gave it 3.5 stars. And although I didn't expect the person it was, I still feel like because that character surrounding it was all blackmail and jealousy, and it still went on into the adult lives, and I was a bit like, really? Was that really necessary to be like that? And I just feel like there should have been a next bit to it, or even an epilogue to it, a bit more, because there was obviously something that should have changed, but it didn't. And I feel like one of the characters in the book, I feel like she had no purpose in it. There was no point of her even being there. It was just an extra character, obviously, to throw into the mix of them. So unfortunately for me, that only got 3.5 stars because I just wasn't feeling that story at all. So the next month is November. Now in this month I ended up reading 7 books, which is the biggest amount of books that I read in the whole year, in every month, to be honest, because I did end up doing a readathon in this month, and I managed to read a lot more books, which was actually quite good. But the first one I read was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. Now for me personally, this book was just not it. I didn't technically read it, I listened to it because I knew it was in third person, and I'm not a big fan of third person books, and I thought if I listened to it instead, I might be able to get into it a bit more. No, I wish I never did, because I just did not enjoy this book at all. It was very cringy, the way that they were talking about sex and initiated it. It was very like, but it took a long time to get to that point, and it was about 80% of the way through until something actually happened, and it was a bit like, it just felt a bit odd and strange to me, this book did, and I didn't really enjoy it. So I wasn't loving it, and it wasn't my favourite. So for me, this book, like I say, only got 2 stars, and that's kind of being generous. I wish I'd have only gave it 1 star, and personally I think I would give it 1 star now, because it just wasn't it. It wasn't giving what I wanted, so it was kind of a pointless listen, to be honest. And it did take me a while to carry on listening to it because of that reason, because I thought I'm not feeling it, I'm not really getting the vibe from it. So yeah, that book, not for me. So the next book I read in November was Flawless by Elsie Silver. Now this one, I was a bit like, again, it's popular, I don't know if I'm going to like it, but I actually really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series now, because I've actually got Reckless on my book trolley, and that's obviously the 3rd book in the series, and I thought if it's not a book where I can read it as a standalone as well as a series, then I don't want to read it in case it does, and in case it is, and then it confuses me. So I thought, right, let's have a look on Kindle. They are on Kindle Unlimited, so I thought let's start with the first one. So I read Flawless, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and I did give this book 4 stars, and I actually really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think coming away from this book, I wouldn't mind a cowboy myself because I've never really read a book that's a cowboy romance, and with this one being my very first one, I was like, ooh, maybe this is a bit of me. This is a bit of me. I really enjoyed this book. The only thing I didn't like is how Rhett was in the beginning. He was very childish and very like Marder and babyish, and I was a bit like, oh, I hope that's not going to carry on throughout the story, but it didn't. And I was like, thank God for that, because if it did, I'd have been like, oh, maybe I'm going to stop. But it wasn't. And in the end, he sort of realised that his actions were hurting everyone else, not just his reputation. It was hurting everybody else around him. Come to the conclusion, actually, maybe I need to take a step back and realise what's going on and what I'm doing, because it's not just me that's getting hurt, it's everyone else as well. And I liked Summer in this book. She was very feisty, very like, you know, you don't tell me what to do. If I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. And she knew that she liked Rhett and vice versa, but she thought, I'm not, you know, I'm not going off chasing him. If you don't want me, forget it. Like, if he wants me, he will show it. And that's how she sort of stood her ground, and I was like, yes, this is it. So I really like this book. I really like the characters in this story, and I'm really excited to read the rest of the series now because of this one. So the next book I read was also on Kindle Unlimited, and if you can't guess already, then it's another Freedom McFadden. I just can't help myself with Freedom McFadden. I absolutely love them. So the next one is The Co-Worker. Now this one, I only gave this one 4.5 stars. Now the reason why I only gave it 4.5 stars is because how it ended. It was kind of winding me up, and I was like, oh, it should have been a bit more. There's something, you know, something should have happened a bit more, but I can't say it unless you've obviously read it. But I feel like something else should have happened, but the person that it was did not expect it all because of how they were wrote in the book, and I was like, no, it can't be them, it can't be them. And it was, and I was like, oh my God. And then towards the end, as you sort of read why they were doing it, I was like, you know what, I'd have done the fucking same thing, to be honest. So, and I feel like there was a point of why she did it. So some of the stories that she's done don't really have a point to it, because I know that obviously Neverlie, is it Neverlie? The Locked Door is about a serial killer, so he's just doing it because he wants to do it. This one was a bit more like a revenge sort of plot, and I really like that. I really like that, and I really got into it. Again, I didn't guess who it was, but if you sort of thought about it, it would. But there was a bit more of a shockers and, you know, twists and turns, and that's what I love about Freedom McFadden books, because there's a bit of twists and turns in every single angle, and I loved it. But apart from the ending, which was really annoying, so that's why I gave it less of a star, is because of how it ended. So the next one I read in November was Date with Destiny by Lucy Vine. Again, I've not heard anybody talking about this, but when I picked this up in the charity shop and read the blurb, I was like, this sounds a bit of me. I really like the story because of the spiritual / witchy vibe again to it. And this one, it had no spice in it, but I still really enjoyed the storyline with it. So this one is about a woman that ends up turning 32, and all these things that this fortune teller tells her when she's 16, they start to begin to happen. So she has 3 good things and 3 bad things. So the 3 bad things start to happen first, and it makes like, oh my God, it's that fortune teller. She said that this was going to happen, you know. And she's like, no, it can't be, like, it's just a coincidence. And obviously it starts happening a little bit more and more, and she starts to learn actually maybe it's not a coincidence and maybe it is true. So she has to have 3 bad things happen to her, which is a heartbreak, a loss of independence, and a death, and then obviously all the 3 good things. So the 3 good things is a life-changing trip, reconnecting with somebody, and then meeting her soulmate. So I really enjoyed this story, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. The only reason I gave it 4.5 stars is because some of the bits in the middle of the book I was a bit like, why is that happening? But as you read on, you sort of understood why it was happening. So yeah, halfway through the book, like I said, there was something that happens, and I'm a bit like, why is that happening? And I was a bit like, okay. But as you read on, you sort of understood why it was happening and why they had to do it. So yes, I really enjoyed this story, and I enjoyed the storyline of it because, again, it was spiritual / witchy vibe, and that's what I'm sort of into. And yeah, I'm glad I picked this up in the charity shop because I've not really heard a lot of people talking about it. But I did go to Waterstones the other day, and I did actually see it in there, which I wasn't expecting. But yeah, this was quite a good story for me, and I really enjoyed it. So 4.5 stars this was. Eventually in this month, I thought, you know what, I'm going to read the second part of the Twisted series. So I read Twisted Games, and let me tell y'all, this one is my favourite so far in the series. I love this one. I love Bridget, I love Reese. This story, oh my God, I could reread it again. I just loved the whole setup of it, and I feel like as I've read this series, again, like I say, it's much better than the King of Wrath. So I wish I'd have read this series before I read King of Wrath, because I much prefer this one. Bridget and Reese, oh my God, I absolutely loved it. I loved it from beginning to end. I loved how they set up. I loved that, you know, even though she was a princess and she was a bit more of a royalty figure, she wasn't stuck up and she wasn't uptight about it, and Reese was her bodyguard, and we could see that he was falling for her right from the beginning because of how he was treating her, you know, the actions that he was doing. but it wasn't admitting it. But I just, oh my god, I ate this book up. I loved it. There was spice in it, but there was a storyline with it, and that's what I really liked about it. Even though there was, you know, quite spicy scenes in it, there was a storyline to go with it and not just smut, if you know what I mean. So yes, I really thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I cannot wait. Hopefully I'm going to finish this series this year, because oh my god, if these are anything to go by, the rest of them are going to be just as good. I'm hoping. But so far, this one is my favourite, and I gave this 5 stars. So the next one I read was Better Hate Than Never. Now, Two Wrongs Make a Right is the first story to this one. Now, you can read them separately because, again, there's only brief mentions of the characters, but they are an actual series. So this is about B's sister, Kate. Now, this one for me personally, didn't really enjoy it, and I feel like sometimes with series, you're going to love the first book or you're going to love the second book. Well, I feel like that's how it goes anyway. So this one for me only got 3 stars. I didn't particularly love it, and I feel like Kate was very much a, oh, nobody loves me, oh, woe is me, that sort of thing in the characters. And she was like travelling all the time, but she was like, oh, nobody loves me, my family don't bother with me, you know, I'm always like the odd one out and stuff. And it was like, actually, nobody said that to you, or nobody treated you like that, so why was you feeling like that? Because clearly nothing was going off like that. But it was very much a, oh, I feel sorry for me, I'm poor, you know, I'm this, that and the other. And even though Christopher was brought up into this family, they're not related, but his mum and dad died, and they sort of, her parents sort of took him on as their own and sort of came together. But both of them had a thing for each other, but there was enemies right from the beginning. It was like, no, don't like each other, and kind of like clashed all the way through. And then they still did it in their adult life, but I feel like they were trying to repress their feelings for each other, and that's how it came across. And then towards the end it got a little bit better, because obviously eventually they started to work on them feelings and develop each other. But she just was getting on my nerves a little bit, because she was a bit like, woe is me, you know, poor me, everything's wrong about this and blah blah blah. But it wasn't nothing like that, and nobody even said that or even treated her like that, so I don't know why the fuck she even started to be like that. But what I like about these books is the fact that they're written about people that are neurodivergent. So she has got ADHD and he has got migraines and stuff. So I like the fact that Chloe Lees, whatever her name is, she writes about characters with these issues, because she does also suffer with stuff like that. And obviously last book she has B, who is autistic, and then Jamie has social anxiety. So I like the fact that she writes about these things in the books. However, B and Jamie in this book really got on my tits, and I feel like it was very much similar to like Set on You. So Set on You, the first book, really liked it. I really liked Crystal in that one, and then the second book, Crystal in that story was really pissing me off, because she was like, well, I know about relationships, and I'm like, but in the last book you didn't know fuck all, mate. You've had loads of fucking failed relationships, and you know, you're not the dog's bollocks. But that's how she came across in the second book, and it was like really annoying. But B and Jamie in this book, again, Jamie was a bit more like, oh, love suck puppy has to, you know, do everything that fucking B says. If B says jump, he'll fucking say hi, you know, how high. And it was really irritating me, because I was like, oh my god. So whatever went off, like if something happened in the book, B went straight to Jamie, was like, oh my god, this happened, you know, telltale. And then Jamie was like, oh well, you know, oh, it's alright, be like, I'll do anything for you. I'm like, yeah, that's fair enough, but like, you're being a bit suffocating, because you're being like a lovesick puppy, like, oh, I don't want anything to go wrong with her, I don't want it to go away from me. And I'm like it was just really irritating me. Them characters in this book was really irritating me and getting on my nerves, because I was like, why are you being like that? Because in the other book, absolutely fine, but in this book, you're actually getting on my tits. And I just thought, oh my god, I just wanted to slap both of them, because what the fuck. So yeah, and this is the second part of the series. Like I say, there is another book coming out which I more than likely will read, because I want to know what happens to Jules. But I just hope that the characters aren't switched and then fucking does my head in like they did in this one. So yeah, this one, again, 3 stars for me, not my favourite. And then we get to December. So far in December I've only read 3 books, which is woohoo. But I read Cruel Winter with You, which is part of a mini series that's on Kindle to do with Ali Hazelwood. Again, like I say, I really like Ali Hazelwood's books, and I thought, let's go with Ali Hazelwood's book first. So this is Cruel Winter with You. I gave this book 2 stars. Now the only reason I gave it 2 stars is because I know it's a short story, but everything sort of like happened very fast, and that doesn't really make sense, because obviously it's a short story. But I feel like once I got into it, it finished. Like I was a bit like, oh. So I wish this book was longer, because if it was longer and something else sort of happened with it, and she sort of extended on this story a bit more, I think I would have liked this a little bit more. But I feel like these short stories, to be honest, are a little bit pointless, because there isn't much going on and you can't really put any more detail in it, because, you know, they've got to be short and snappy. And I do like short and snappy, but I just feel like it's a bit pointless, to be honest, because it was like once it started, it finished. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of just, yeah, a bit pointless for me. But it was alright, it wasn't a bad story. It just, I wish it was a little bit more, because then I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. So the next book I read was The Christmas Party by Michaela Davids. Now this one, I thought, let's pick up another thriller book. Let's swear away from Freida McFadden, you know, let's see if there's other authors out there that might be just as good. So I thought, oh, this one sounds nice. Let's try this one. Why? Why did I fucking bother? This one, I did read it, but it wasn't gripping and it wasn't good at enticing me to read as Freida McFadden. Now I know that's kind of biased because the only thriller books I've read is from Freida McFadden, and there is probably authors out there that grip you like that, but oh my god. I thought, I knew who the fuck it was straight away. And I was like, I know someone's going to go off this character because it's clear. Like, why would you invite all your family to a Christmas party after 10 years and not talking, and then all of a sudden you want to rekindle it? That's the question going around in my head. So yeah, I didn't quite guess as to who else was involved with it, but I knew this other character was going to do something, because I thought, well, you can kind of see it coming. And her husband was a bit of an arsehole, was a bit of an uptight, you know, he come across very nice, but then behind closed doors he used to beat her up and, you know, tell her that she shouldn't be wearing this, she shouldn't be doing that, you know, controlling her a bit, and he was a bit narcissistic, which I can understand with the storyline of what happened, but I was a bit like, it just wasn't gripping, and I thought, no, this is just not for me, and I just don't really like it. So I only gave it 2 stars because, again, like I said, it weren't gripping me to keep reading. I did end up reading it all, but this is the first part of the series, so this one sets up the other 2 books, but I'm like, do I bother reading the second story in case it is a bit better? But Sasha in this story was really fucking grating on me. So she thought that her husband Jesse was just telling her what to do all the time, like, oh, you know, oh, I'm doing what I want, and like, he was like, you know, you need to take a step back a bit. You've been working and working and working, you need to just take a step back a bit, take a breather. And she's like, no, don't tell me what to do. So she goes to this party, gets absolutely blotto, fucks off, stamps her feet. She seemed a bit like, oh, he's always telling me what to do, but then as you sort of read on, he wasn't telling her what to do, he was just telling her, you know, you need to take a break, you need to step back a bit, because you're working and working and working, you're going to burn yourself out, basically. She's like, oh, I always look after Freya, I always do this and that and the other. And actually it wasn't. It was him that was always looking after Freya, which is their little girl. It was him that was looking after the girl and doing stuff with her while she was fucking work all the time. And it was like, it just seemed a bit like she was stamping her feet and being a bit fucking, you know, arse with him. And yet it wasn't. It was the other way around, where he was just telling her, you know, you need to take a break, you need to calm down a little bit because you're going to burn out. And she was like, no, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing it, I'm not doing as you tell me. Do you know what I mean? She's just a bit of a fucking stroppy me. So yeah, again, for me, like I say, it wasn't my favourite book, and it's not the best story I've ever read, to be honest. And I hope to God I do find another thriller book that is similar to how Freida McFadden writes, because I would love to find another author that is very similar to her in the way that she writes, because oh my god, they're just so good. But this one particularly for me, no, not for me. So the next one we move on to is another DNF. Now this one is a Christmas book, because if you watched my previous video, then I was reading only Christmas books, and this one I had to DNF because I just wasn't loving it. So this is called Just Like Magic by Sarah Hogel, don't know how you pronounce the name. But to me, I feel like this was kind of like a remastered Elf, and even though I absolutely love Elf, this wasn't giving that vibe. And I thought, the woman in this was very entitled, very uptight, very like, I can do what I want, you know what I mean? Like very fucking, just annoying. She was just doing my head in, and I didn't really like her. And she was she was a social media star, and she'd come into a lot of money, and then all of a sudden, because she'd come into a lot of money, she had to blow it all, and then she's got nothing left. So she was living in a dingy ass, no money, no car, no nothing, you know, and she had to sort of put a front on for her followers and her Instagram followers and her family and stuff, and she was very like, oh yeah, I've got the best of the best, but actually she hadn't. I think if I'd have kept reading the story, I think that would have changed, but I just weren't really feeling it. I didn't really understand what the fuck was going on, and this holiday spirit, I know this is like magic, but I was like, is she like talking to her subconscious or something? Is she talking to herself? And I just, even though this person had come to help her, it was just a bit weird. And then she started to have these feelings for him, and I'm like, is he not supposed to be like a spirit sort of thing? I don't understand. So I weren't loving it, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy it, and that's why I stopped. And I thought, you know what, get yourself to the 100-page mark. If you don't like it, put it down. So I did. I thought, I can't keep forcing it because you're just going to be in a big slump again. So I just stopped, and I thought, just stop now. So yeah. So the last book that I read in December was The Gingerbread Christmas Village. Now this one for me only got 3.5 stars. So this one wasn't bad, but it wasn't like, you know, a major story for me. And this one is another holiday book again, and I feel like the holiday stories that I have read, so the Christmassy books, have all been very fluffy and very no spice in it. So no spice in it whatsoever, and I feel like they follow the same sort of theme. So obviously because of Christmas, but they all follow the same sort of way of writing. So for me personally, that's why I only gave it 3.5 stars. It wasn't bad, but it's not a story that I'd have been like, wow, this is absolutely amazing. So this one is about an older person falling in love. So she just split up with her ex-husband, and she's trying to rekindle the Christmas spirit again to build up the gingerbread village, because that's what she does. She builds gingerbread stuff at Christmas to make a little village set to go into the hall, and that's how they sort of have the setup from there. So she takes it over from her family, and her family's retired and obviously moved to Spain and stuff, so her mum and dad. So she takes over that business to try and set up these little village houses, you know, and the little scenery stuff to put on a show for the community. And she's got a friend there as well who owns a cafe, and then her other friend Patrick, which has always been there, and he's sort of like the maintenance man for the school and stuff, so he's a caretaker, and he is a younger figure. So well, I say younger, he's younger than her. He's in his 40s and she's in her 60s, I believe. So yeah, I feel like it was very much similar to The Switch. So The Switch was talking about an old woman and an older man, but obviously in The Switch it switched over with her daughter, a granddaughter. So her granddaughter took over her life while she took over hers, and it was very much similar to that because of the fact that it was written about an older person and an older person falling in love and meeting somebody and stuff. It was kind of, it was sweet, it was nice, it was a nice little story to read about, but it just wasn't like something that I thought, oh my god, this is amazing, this is absolutely fantastic story. But it was better than the previous one, and I actually quite enjoyed listening to the side of her falling in love again. And even though she just split up with her ex-husband and was sort of like the laughing stock of the town, she sort of rekindled that back up and thought, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna, you know, fall back into it again. And Patrick obviously really liked her and liked her all the time. And she was a bit like, oh yeah, but he's always so nice to me, and he's always kind to me, and he always helps me out, and you know, I don't want to lose that friendship and stuff. And then obviously he's showing her that maybe he needs to move on a bit more because they're not getting any younger, and he needs to show her feelings in the end, because he always sort of repressed it and didn't want to tell her, but then eventually showed her instead. And it was really nice of how he showed her with the Christmas lights and the Christmas theme of it. It was really nice. And then obviously together they got together, and it was really nice. It was really nice like that because of how he treated her and how he showed her he liked her and loved her, and that was kind of nice. I really liked that bit of the story. And obviously her mate as well, her mates then end up rekindling an old love from a very, very long time ago, and that was kind of nice as well. So yeah, it wasn't a bad story, but it wasn't like something that I was really gripped by, so it was still an alright story, if that makes sense. So yeah, and then currently I am still reading The Christmas Wish, which I don't think I'm going to finish by the end of December, so I'm not even going to put it in this yearly wrap up, but I am reading The Christmas Wish, and I'm about chapter 10 in it, and I said I was going to try and end it by December, so we'll see if we can finish it. But if I do, obviously I'll put it in my January reads if I do end up finishing it. But yeah, that is everything that I've read this year. I read about 24 books. I feel like I've missed a few, so I feel like I might have read about 26, I don't know. But I've only read less than 30. I think I read about 36 last year, so not as many. But again, if I didn't have that massive slump in between the year, then I think I would have read more. But yeah, let me know how many books you read this year and what are your reads for next year. And I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and a happy new year, and I'll see you next time. Bye.